have done over our first 3¾ years of existence, and then set out kind of what the sort of structure and the focus of our new strategy is, and then how you can get involved in responding to that consultation. And then after that, as I say, we will move on to holding a discussion. So first of all, in terms of what is ESS and what do we do, we are just going to show you a very short animation which sets out exactly what our role is and our function, and then I'll follow up with a little bit more detail about that. So Neil, if you could press play, that would be great.
At Environmental Standards Scotland, ESS, our job is to scrutinise if Scottish public bodies are complying with environmental law and assess how effective that law is. In the last financial year, our team has worked on subjects ranging from water and air quality to biodiversity and climate change. We received 68 representations from members of the public and environmental groups from all across Scotland, highlighting their individual environmental concerns. And we launched investigations into special protection areas for protected birds and the management of Scottish fisheries. We also contributed to consultations on new environmental law and shared our views on the circular economy. In several cases, we worked with public bodies to address concerns through informal resolution. We reached informal resolutions on aspects of water quality and how the Scottish Government assesses the impact of its infrastructure plans on greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, we established a community engagement programme so we can speak directly to members of the public about their environmental concerns. Find out more about our work and how you can get in touch at environmentalstandards.scot.
Okay, so that's a that's a snapshot of where we were at when we published our annual report last autumn. Just in terms of background, I mentioned that we've been in operation for 3¾ years. We were set up in 2021 under the terms of the UK withdrawal from the European Union Continuity Scotland Act just before the last Scottish parliamentary election, and we came into existence on the 1st of October 2021. And our functions, as listed on the right-hand side of the screen, are to monitor and investigate public bodies' compliance with environmental law. So that means bodies like the Scottish Government, like SEPA, like NatureScot, to scrutinise the effectiveness of that law and look at how it's being implemented and applied. We are wholly independent of the Scottish Government. Scottish ministers have no control over what we do, and we are accountable directly to the Scottish Parliament. Our board, their appointment is subject to the approval of the Scottish Parliament, and the strategy that we're going to be discussing tonight will also be subject to approval by the Scottish Parliament. So just fleshing out those functions a little bit more, in terms of monitoring, we do a range of things to sort of monitor what is going on. We look at new legislation, we look beyond sort of new legislation on a sort of horizon scanning basis at what is coming down the tracks, both within the UK, within Scotland, and also on an international scale. We look at environmental data in terms of what that's telling us, in terms of the trends, in terms of the state of the environment, and also do work looking at kind of emerging threats and new developing areas in terms of environmental risk. And an example of that is, just to illustrate it, is antimicrobial resistance, where we commissioned some work a couple of years ago about that. We can also receive what we term representations from members of the public, from community groups, and from organisations. And as you heard in the animation just now, at the end of last year, we had received 68 of those since we came into existence. That updated number is now 79 in terms of concerns that have been raised directly with us. Having got that monitoring and gathering that information in, our scrutiny functions, we can pursue that in two ways. Firstly, through our analytical work, which we choose to do and where we have discretion to do. And to illustrate that, we currently have work ongoing around invasive non-native species, around seafloor integrity, and also around rural diffuse pollution. We can also do investigatory work where we'll look into the specifics of a particular case, whether that's been something that we've identified ourselves, or whether that's in response to representations received. And again, as was mentioned in the animation, we have been doing work around special protected areas, which is coming to a conclusion at the moment. We're also doing work, another major piece of investigatory work around bycatch and discards from fisheries. And the final bit of the picture is around securing compliance and effectiveness. And there are a range of mechanisms by which we can strive to do that. We aim, and the Act which sets us up requires us to do this, is to try and resolve issues with public bodies on an agreement basis and trying to resolve things informally. But as the right-hand three boxes show, we've got a range of more stringent powers which are available to us, where we can issue compliance notices, which would require an authority to comply with an environmental law. We can issue improvement reports, which we present to the Scottish Parliament, which then have to be the public body, often the Scottish Government, has to respond to in a certain timescale. And in extreme cases, we can petition to enter into a judicial review in the Court of Session. So that's our main functions in terms of what we do and how we do that. There is more detail, in the strategy at a high level, which you may or may not have seen, but it also provides links to a range of more detailed documents in terms of how we pursue those things. So moving on, how can people engage with us? Well, there's a range of mechanisms by which people can get in touch with us. I've mentioned through representations. You can contact us through email, through representation forms on our websites, in good old-fashioned hard copy, and also through our community engagement program. We have run now over 20 engagement programs with different community groups in different parts of Scotland, both in person and online, and that's something that we will continue to do during the course of the next strategy period. And with that, which is a kind of very brief overview of kind of what our role is and how we do it, I'm going to pass to Neil, who's going to give you some of the highlights of work that we have done to date.
Thanks, Mark. So this will just be a little bit of a flavour of some of the things we've worked on to date, but it will try and give you a bit of a sense of the different types of work we do and the different ways we get involved in improving environmental law. The first thing to say is that we've undertaken work across all of our 8 environmental topics. So we have a very broad remit, and we've kind of broken it down into 8 topics to try and help us manage our work and understand where we're taking action. So these were set out in our previous current strategic plan, and those are the 8 topics on the screen now. So to give you a little bit of a flavour of some of those, I'm going to talk a little bit about the investigation we did into climate change and local authority reporting duties, the work we did on analysis of storm overflows, and some work we've done to date and are still involved with in terms of influencing environmental legislation through the Natural Environment Bill. So some of you may well know that in December 2023, we concluded an investigation that was in response to a representation around the effectiveness of the systems in place for local authorities to report on and take action in their contribution to delivering the climate change targets. So we found a number of things in relation to that. work around the vagueness and complexity of the guidance and the scrutiny of reports, and the inclusion in those reports of scope 3 emissions, which are the sort of downstream emissions from local authorities, but which are the largest part of their emissions footprint. This is an example of where we kind of used a mixed medium, if you like, of mechanisms to achieve results. So through discussion with Scottish Government, following our investigation, we managed to reach agreement to address 4 of the improvement recommendations that we had, but we couldn't reach agreement on one of them around the mandatory reporting of scope 3 emissions. So we then moved to lay an improvement plan, improvement report in the Parliament that Mark mentioned as one of our more formal mechanisms, and the Scottish Government then moved to prepare an improvement plan responding to that, the recommendations in the improvement report. Scottish Parliament then approved that improvement plan, and I'm pleased to say that as a result, scope 3 emissions reporting is now going to be phased in from the beginning of 2027. So that is an improvement, we think, on what was previously the case. A different example is from our analytical work. So we wanted to undertake some work into storm overflows, sewage discharge into the environment, because we knew that this was an area of quite considerable concern. Our focus was very much on around the data and then the effectiveness of the legislation and policy that guided that. And again, we found a number of shortcomings which we highlighted in our report, particularly around the comprehensiveness and the presentation of the data around that, that was very difficult for the man in the street to understand. Through that report, we made a number of recommendations. We made 6 recommendations to Scottish Water, to SEPA, and to the Scottish Government. And I'm pleased to say that all 6 of those recommendations we've now had responses from the responsible authorities, and they've agreed to implement what we suggested. And that includes, hot off the press, Scottish Government agreeing to prepare new guidance on how the system should operate, and the wonderfully titled BTIC, which is best technology known to not exceed excessive cost, which is always a bit of a mouthful. The final example is around the Natural Environment Bill. So we, as Mark has mentioned, we do look to try and influence legislation and changes that are coming to environmental law, and the Natural Environment Bill is one of the biggest ones on the go at the moment. So we've had some engagement and we've provided responses to public consultations undertaken by the Scottish Government before the bill was introduced. We've also held some discussions with Scottish Government because this is an area where there is a new role proposed in terms of independent review of the proposed biodiversity targets. And then more recently, we've been engaging with Parliament through a written response to the call for views, contributing to the financial memorandum that accompanies the bill, and providing evidence to the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee on their scrutiny of the bill at stage 1. And that's something that will continue into the autumn, but we thought was an important one to highlight. In terms of a few things that are kind of upcoming, Mark has already trailed a few of these. So we've got work underway around management of fisheries. We've got work underway around public registers, invasive non-native species, and seafloor integrity. And one thing we thought would be useful to highlight is the new duties that are likely to be coming our way during the next strategy period. So I've already mentioned the Natural Environment Bill and the biodiversity recovery targets that are coming, and we will have a role in relation to that, or it's proposed that we'll have a role in relation to that. But also following on from that investigation that we did, there's also a role likely to be proposed for Environmental Standards Scotland in terms of scrutinising the reporting by local authorities on climate change. So with that, hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour, and I'm going to hand on to Celeste, who's going to take you through some of the highlights of what's in our new draft strategy.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, so our new strategy, in this what we've tried to do is clarify and simplify in comparison to our first strategic plan. And we can only do this now because we have a few years of experience in operation, and we have a lot of contributing documents that now sit underneath the strategy that we didn't have when we first wrote the strategic plan. So we have our annual reports, our business plans, our sustainability plan, and much more that can all support this more streamlined version of our strategy that we are presenting to you today. So this is a more streamlined version, but there's no radical shifts necessarily in our approach, and our remit remains the same. So we've reduced our strategy from around 60 pages, which was our first strategic plan, to around 20. So hopefully, yeah, less for you to read through, but you'll get the same strong core message that we want to convey. To give you an idea of this, our vision that we will have in our 2026 to 2031 strategy is that by holding public authorities to account, we will ensure that Scotland's people and nature benefit from a high quality, healthy environment through improved compliance with and better implementation of effective environmental law. And I think this really serves as our kind of long-term indicator. This is what we are wanting to strive to achieve over this 5-year period and beyond. We can then look forward to our principles. And our principles have evolved slightly from our first strategic plan, but really they remain quite clear and quite similar. We will be independent and trusted. We will be evidence-driven. We will be open and transparent. We will engage widely. We will seek to resolve issues through agreement wherever possible. And we will prioritise our efforts and resources to maximise our impact. And these really serve as a foundation for all of the work that we do. We move on to our priorities. So we have decided to focus on 4 priorities for our proactive analytical work over the next 5 years. And these are climate change, nature, resources, and water. Now, while there's been some significant progress in improving Scotland's environment over recent decades, I think we can all accept that there's still some profound challenges that remain. And we think that these 4 priorities really demonstrate this in our areas that we can have improved impact. So if we think about climate change, we are wanting to look at the next steps we need to take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to think about reaching the 2045 net zero target that we have set for ourselves. When we're thinking about nature, we're looking at addressing the extreme loss of biodiversity that's happening across our landscapes and seascapes. When we're thinking about resources, we're wanting to move to a more circular economy, reducing our waste output. And when we're thinking about water, this encompasses improving marine, coastal, and freshwater environments. Furthermore, on top of these 4 priorities, we are retaining flexibility for any emerging areas that come up during this 5-year period. We're also going to be monitoring and following up on any previous scrutiny work that we have completed. And we are also going to be accepting representations across all areas of environmental concern. We have set ourselves 5 strategic objectives. So for number 1, securing compliance and improving effectiveness. ESS, as we've heard, has significant statutory powers, and we're using these to ensure compliance, bring about improvements to the effectiveness of environmental law, and improve the implementation and application of that law as well. Our second objective, looking at analysing and investigating environmental concerns. We have 2 main mechanisms to do this: receiving representations. This can be from anyone, the public, community groups, whistleblowers, organisations. And our second mechanism is our own proactive monitoring, analytical, and engagement work as well. Our third objective is looking at monitoring and scrutinising environmental performance. And to do this, we aim to synthesise evidence from a range of sources. We're striving to be a well-connected organisation, and we may be able to issue our own calls for evidence as well, which we've already done for our INS work, for example. And we'll aim to respond to any relevant consultations and calls for views as deemed appropriate. And when we're looking at our 4th objective, engaging and communicating effectively, this is where we're really looking at drawing upon those principles that we've mentioned before. We want to be seen as independent, trusted, transparent, and effective in all of our engagement and communication work. Our 5th objective, being an effective and efficient organisation, really draws from our people strategy that we've recently published, which has 3 main pillars. We want to be attracting and keeping the right people, developing and nurturing the people that we have, and enabling great performance and delivery throughout our organisation. So our approach to measuring our performance, we have approaches to evaluating our impact and also measuring our performance. To evaluate our impact, we use a theory of change approach to demonstrate how our scrutiny work has an impact on the environment. So for each of our major investigations and our analytical projects, we'll develop a theory of change to explain how the actions taken by ESS are expected to contribute ultimately to improved environmental outcomes and contribute to that vision that we set out. Measuring our performance, we use key performance indicators and performance management indicators to keep on top of this. And I will pass over to Neil to go through our consultation document and how you can engage with it.
Thanks, Celeste. So really, this is just my opportunity, I guess, to plug the fact that the consultation is open and to encourage you to respond to that, you or your organisations to respond to the written consultation. Obviously, it's great to have the opportunity to speak to folk today, and we'll have some other engagement over the summer period. And we'll obviously listen and hear what's coming through that, the questions that we have, the suggestions that people make. But the way to really influence our final strategy that will be submitted to the Parliament is to submit a written response. There's a number of ways you can do that. The best way to do so is through Citizen Space, which is an online consultation platform, and Rory will post links to that in a moment in the chat. But you could also write direct to us if you would prefer to do that if you don't have access to Citizen Space. So the closing date for consultation is the 29th of August, and then we have quite a short period of about 6 weeks where we have to turn around the comments that have been made, reflect on those and adjust our draft of our strategy, and then we will submit that to Parliament for approval in October. And the Parliament has a period of time to look at that. They'll probably call us for evidence, and then they will decide whether or not to approve that strategy later in the autumn. A couple of things to kind of highlight from the consultation. So we're obviously asking about the different components of the strategy that Celeste has outlined, but we're also interested in people's views on a number of impact assessments that we've undertaken. So I'm not going to go into these in detail, but happy to take questions as part of this. But as a public body, we have a duty to undertake a number of impact assessments about possible way that our strategy may affect different parts of the country, different parts of the population. And so we've undertaken screening or the equivalent of a number of these assessments, and those are set out in our consultation document. And then finally, one thing particularly to highlight is that we've also responded through the consultation and through our draft strategy to a recommendation that was made to us by Scottish Government as part of their environmental governance review. So I think it was back in 2023 that the Scottish Government consulted on their review of environmental governance. We and a whole range of other organisations responded to that consultation at the time. And then towards the end of 2024, the Scottish Government reflected on what they'd been told through that consultation and set out what they were intending to do as a result. And one of the things they said in that was they made a recommendation to ESS to give further consideration to the conditions where it would be appropriate for us to investigate individual circumstances of a local area, group or community. And they also recommended that the Parliament considers that matter when they look at our draft strategy. So we've responded to that at the time, but we've also set out in more detail our response to that recommendation in the consultation document, and we've covered some aspects of that in our draft strategy. So we're clear, and the law is clear, that ESS cannot currently act as an appeals body and take enforcement action against public authorities on their individual regulatory decisions, but we will and we do consider whether individual decisions might indicate systemic or cumulative problems with compliance or with the effectiveness of environmental law. So we're interested in people's views on that. Have we addressed adequately that representation, that recommendation? Have we made it clear exactly what we can and can't do here? And so we're interested to hear people's views on that as part of the consultation as well. So with that, we'll move on to questions and discussion. And at that point, I'll hand back over to Mark.